In this video, we're going to go ahead and take a look at the femur, the largest bone in our body, with a upward and medially pointed head. And we're actually going to start off in that side of the femur. We're going to take a look at the proximal end. This head here articulates with the acetabulum of the coxal bone. So let's go ahead and start labeling that. So here's the head of the femur, pretty obvious structure. And then in the middle, you see there's this little divot. That's called the fovea capitis. Fovea capitis. If you remember, the radius has a fovea as well, but this is called the fovea capitis, much bigger. And then below the head, we have a neck. Here's the femoral neck. So when someone says the femoral neck, this is typically what they're referring to, but it's probably best to be extra specific and call that the anatomical neck, because there is actually a surgical neck here, just like on the humerus. All right, you might notice looking at the femur these two very large prominences. You can see them from the front, but you really see them from a posterior view. They're right here, this and this. Those are called trochanters. You're probably familiar with tubercles. Those are small muscle attachments. Tuberosities are the bigger muscle attachments. These are the only two trochanters in our body. They're even bigger than tuberosities, and they are muscle attachments. The first one is called the greater trochanter. It's the larger of the two, right here. And then this one is called the lesser trochanter. They're easiest to see posteriorly, but you may see them tagged anteriorly as well. This is all still greater trochanter, and here's lesser trochanter. All right, the model's done a pretty good job here of showing us the intertrochanteric line. Now, there's a crest and a line. You can see both trochanters are connected from both views. So anteriorly, you can see this faint sort of line here. That's called the intertrochanteric line. So that's an anterior structure. If we flip around, we see that there is a little bit more well-defined connection between the two trochanters, and we call that the intertrochanteric crest. So this whole area here, intertrochanteric crest. I could tag that on a quiz simply with a line as well. Don't let that confuse you. Remember, the crest is posterior, the line is anterior. Intertrochanteric line and crest. All right, this next structure is called the trochanteric fossa, and it's located right here. That's a muscle attachment site. Another muscle attachment site that we're going to label, you may have to use your imagination a teensy bit. No, it's pretty visible. Right here, there is a slightly raised tubercle, and it's called the quadrate tubercle. That tubercle is named for the muscle that inserts here, and that muscle is called quadratus. Quadratus muscle. Let's see if we can add that in. There we go. This muscle right here, quadratus femoris. So it kind of pulls up this area here, which is called the quadrate tubercle. All right, and our next structure, we already talked about the surgical neck, so let's go to the gluteal tuberosity. Gluteal tuberosity, it's different than some other tuberosities. Tuberosities are typically, well, kind of like this tubercle. They're kind of round or a knob-like the lesser trochanter, just not that big. This particular tuberosity is pretty flat and relatively unexciting given how big of a muscle attaches to it. So it's right here, gluteal tuberosity. Let's add in some muscles. We're going to have to add in all of them. So you can see the gluteus maximus attachment right there. And if we remove that, we're going to be looking at the gluteal tuberosity that I was just showing you. Right here, this roughened area. It sort of comes off the intertrochanteric crest, more so closer to the greater trochanter side of the intertrochanteric crest. You can kind of see it start right in this area, and then it goes down. Pectineal line and spiral line, we won't cover. These are all parts of, these are various muscle attachment lines that sort of merge to form the posterior border. Rather than going through them all individually, let's just name the posterior border. So this border, it forks closer to the bottom, but you can see right in this area, it's sort of a single line, and we'll call that the posterior border. Another name for that is the linea aspera, and it does have lips. You can see that there is a medial lip and a lateral lip and an intermediate lip. We're going to keep it simple, just one name. If you see a line on a quiz like this, posterior border. And then, of course, there's a medial and lateral border as well. It's sort of triangular shaped, just like the humerus and radius and ulna. We covered all those borders. So you can see that there is a medial and a lateral border, which means there's going to be an anterior surface, a lateral surface, a posterior border like we already said, a medial surface, and I know it's medial because femoral head points medially, and then that brings us back to medial border, which we already talked about. So those are the borders and surfaces for the femur. All right, that brings us to two structures that come off of the medial and lateral border. Oops, it's not quite as obvious. Goodness gracious. Struggling here, guys, I'm sorry. It's not quite as obvious as it is on the humerus, because the issue is we have the posterior border that splits here. So don't be tempted to tag or to call this, I mean, I won't tag it, so you'll be fine on a quiz, but these kind of look like they might be the supracondylar ridges. They aren't. The supracondylar ridges are coming off of the medial and lateral border, just like the humerus. So that's the medial supracondylar ridge and the lateral supracondylar ridge. This area in between here is called the popliteal surface, or popliteal, you might hear. Your popliteal area is sort of your knee pit. It's the back of your knee. So you'll see a lot of things here called popliteal. There's even a muscle called Popliteus. You'll also see a patellar area on the tibia. So it's patellar surface on the femur, popliteal surface on the femur, popliteal area on the tibia. Now, the artists or developers or whatever they are who made this app, they didn't make the adductor tubercle super prominent, unfortunately, but you can see it. There's a little bump right there. It's called the adductor tubercle. All right, so our next structure, let's go ahead and look at the condyles. Here is the medial condyle and the lateral condyle. I included a little bit of the epicondyle there on accident. Lateral condyle and medial condyle. Those can be seen from the front as well. Medial condyle, lateral condyle. I'm just talking about these two, large areas. The only thing though, just FYI, is specifically this area in here. The medial and most lateral points of both of these is called the epicondyle. So let's name those. So this area here is the medial epicondyle. And this area here is the lateral epicondyle. So with the exclusion of that, really these two very large masses are all condyle, with the exception of those two epicondyles. All right, lastly, I'm afraid we aren't going to, oops, I was on the wrong side. I'm afraid we may not see the popliteal groove. Let's see how they did. They did okay, I suppose. Here, let's not give up yet. It's not looking great, but there is a groove right here called the popliteal groove. It's a groove for the popliteus muscle. I won't ask about that on our quiz. And then lastly, we just have the intercondylar fossa. I think I'm missing something on my list of structures. I apologize. Because we have the patellar surface here. That's the patellar surface. Your patella can sit anywhere from up here, depending on if your leg's straight or bent. That's a little high, and it can be all the way down here, pretty low if your knee's bent. It rotates through this area. It doesn't actually travel down towards the tibia. It travels like around and back as you bend your knee. So anyway, this area is the patellar surface, and this area here is the intercondylar fossa right there. All right, and that's it for the femur. Thanks, guys.